Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So we're in the studio today because I'm just going to give you a few tips which I have learnt along the way about how to help make your street photography even better. So if that's something that you're into, take a seat and stick around. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video here at Benham Media. My name is Nathan and it's an absolute pleasure to see all of you here today. So if you guys don't know who I am a photographer from London, and I have recently in the last year or so really got into street photography, mainly because of what happened with COVID. You know, I was a portrait photographer to begin with, and yeah, because I couldn't really book any clients, I've got really into street photography. It wasn't something that I was really keen on doing. I'm still quite nervous about going out in the street and taking photographs of people, but with the architecture that I have to my exposure within London, I have really sort of started to find my own niche and my own style and my own way of shooting street photography, and I know it is quite a popular trend. So over the last 18 months or so, I have really sort of got a sort of an idea on how to make your photographs stand out, not only just because of your editing style, but what you should really be looking out for within street photography. And I want to sort of share some of the things that I have learnt with these 5 little tips. So without further ado, let's get into tip number 1. So tip number 1 is rule of thirds. Now this is something that we talk about in photography quite a fair bit. Even if you're just doing portrait photography or portfolio photography, landscape or even cityscape photography, the rule of thirds is quite an important rule. Now, as a viewer to a photograph, your eyes are generally sort of looking out for these particular sites. Now, rule of thirds, if you look at your camera, sometimes you get these nice little grids broken up into 9 rectangles. And yeah, your eyes are sort of narrowed down to the sort of like the center piece of this particular grid. And if you can use the rule of thirds to your exposure, then you can really sort of get your viewer of your photograph into a particular sort of side of it. So rule of thirds, quite simply, knock your photograph into sort of thirds, your composition into thirds. If you want something to the left, try to keep the other 2 thirds blank, and so on and so forth. Keep it center, keep it either the top or the bottom, but have the rule of thirds going forward. Now, a lot of cameras do in fact let you have the grid up on your camera so you can sort of see as you're taking your shots, or you can also opt not to have this as well. But also when you start cropping your photograph, have the idea of rule of thirds in mind when you are sort of in the editing suite, which will lead us on to the next tip, which is in fact cropping. Now, cropping is quite important, I find, when you are taking a photograph, mainly because when you take your shots, I potentially sort of like shoot outside where I plan to sort of bring it in. Depending on how I'm going to shoot my photograph or where I want to share my photograph, either be on social media or up on my website, I will sort of crop it down a little bit to either be a square or the usual 2x3, anything which I can sort of like show off my work best of. So I always have a bit of space around it anyway. But sometimes when I've taken a photograph and I find it sort of a little bit distracting that there's a lamppost there or there's a person in the way, I always sort of bring it down to the crop as well. But when you're also taking photographs of architecture, for example, sometimes bringing it a nice tight crop, a little bit like the photographs that we're showing on screen right now, I want you to focus on the actual architecture of those particular buildings. So without anything distracting on the other side or up or down or anything like that, I wanted you to focus mainly on the subject at hand. So I have brought my photography and my photograph down within the cropping, which you can do within your editing suite. Now, of course, you're not generally going to think about this while you are taking your photographs, especially if you're out there sort of like run and gun, get your camera out, shoot away. But when you are back into your editing suite, regardless if you use Lightroom or any other sort of type of software, have a little look at cropping it in a little bit and seeing what that looks. You don't need to have the full frame in your photograph, and cropping can really bring out another layer to your photography. And yeah, that brings us quite nicely onto our next tip. Now, layering is very, very good, and it can bring something different to your actual photographs. Instead of just taking a photograph of a building or sort of like a scape or anything like that, have a bit of a think about what could be in the foreground as well as in the background. For me, I like sort of shooting through things, that way you've got a little bit of bokeh just in front of it. Or if you're taking a photograph of a particular subject, to have a think about what is behind it. So bump up your aperture so you've got a lot more in sort of focus. So you've got the background, then you've got the foreground, and potentially you've got somebody in frame as well, just in front of you. And that way you've got a nice little bit of depth of field. Even if it's in focus or out of focus, that sort of layering gives something a little bit more different, a little bit more of an edge to your actual overall photography as well. So when you are out and about, have a little look around at archways, at bridges, at sort of people in the frame as well, and have a little think about open up that aperture a little bit. So if you've got two people by the river, or if you've got a set of buildings just behind an archway or something like that, yeah, open up your aperture, get everything in focus, and that way you can really bring out your sort of frame a little bit as well. Also, if you are shooting through stuff and having something in the background blurred out or something in the foreground blurred out, it can really bring a nice sort of like extra bit of class to your photography. Makes it look like you have thought about your photograph. It's made you've had a bit of a think about your composition altogether, that you haven't just taken out your camera and just shot away. Tip number 4 I find is a balance. Everybody likes balance. We all are a little bit OCD really, especially when we're looking at photographs. If you have a particular subject and it's slightly off center, or it's sort of like a little bit out the side, it doesn't sort of like, as a viewer to that photograph, you get a little bit like, is it any good? Not any good? Now this could also help a little bit with your cropping, because if you have taken a photograph of a particular person or a particular object and it is slightly off center, obviously the crop can help. So that will obviously brings you into tip number 2, and then you can use your sort of like software to sort of like balance your photograph a little bit. But with photographs like this, something that I really like to do is sitting in an alleyway or a doorway and waiting for people to walk past and get them dead center into your shot. And that way you've got a nice little frame around them within the doorway or the alleyway. But it can also help as well when you're taking a photograph of a building or a subject or anything like that. If you can get them dead center to balance out your photograph. And it also helps again with the rule of third. So it brings it back to the other tips that I've already said, by cropping your photograph to make it sort of dead center, or to at least bring it into the rule of thirds as well. So they all sort of like jumble all up together, and it can really turn a photograph which is slightly off kilt a little bit to something that can really sort of lead the viewer into your photo and make them hit that like button on social media a little bit as well. And my final tip for this video to sort of really bring out your photography is leading lines. If you are a fan of photography and you have been following photography for a while, or you follow quite a lot of photographers on YouTube, you will hear the term leading lines an awful lot. It is something, a way of making the viewer look at something and then look at something else within your photograph. It focuses you on a particular subject, and that subject, be it a railing, be it a bus, be it a bridge, be it a road marking on the floor, it can really sort of make the viewer sort of look at the entirety of the photograph. When you are looking at photographs, which again you've balanced very well, you are looking at a particular subject. Something that's in the center, you look at that and you don't really see what else is around you. But when you use leading lines within your photography, you make the viewer look at the entirety of that photograph. They're looking at something first because your eye is naturally drawn to that, and then because that leading line brings you all the way into the photograph, you can start looking at other things around that particular photograph and they see the entire scene. Now, you do need to plan these type of photos, you do need to have a bit of a look around, and when you see a particular leading line, try to sort of make it follow into your main focus of that photo. So for example, this photograph that I was taking at the Tower Bridge and the City Hall, I decided to use the sort of like the edge of the drop, and you follow that line all the way up to City Hall and then to Tower Bridge in the background. And then you can really sort of make the viewer go, wow, this whole entire piece is a lovely put together photograph. And that is it, guys. Those are my 5 tips. Just to run down them quickly, it is rule of thirds, cropping, layering, balance, and using leading lines. And I can guarantee if you start putting some of these into practice, your own thoughts of your own photography will start to improve, and eventually you will start seeing them before you start taking your own shots. So if you are out and about, you might start recognizing, oh my God, that's a fantastic leading line leading to that particular subject, or that's a wonderful framing for that. Or if I take a picture of this, I know I can bring it down and crop it a little bit like that. And it can really sort of start edging yourself forward into a more confident photographer, a sort of, I wouldn't say better photographer, but you know, there's something down to your own preference. But these type of tips can really help, and I really do hope that you sort of like find these very helpful and you start using them in your own photography. And of course, I would love to see said photographs. So I do in fact have a hashtag over on Instagram, so it is BMPix2020, and if you do fancy using that hashtag, I would love to see some of your photographs, and yeah, we could probably connect on that platform. But guys, that is it from me, a nice little short video for you, just a sort of couple little tips to sort of help improve your photography the best way that I know. And until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day, and just remember, I've been Nathan, you have been sensational, and until next time, goodbye. Mwah, 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 mwah.